prison that was never supposed to be this dangerous. They called it the Country Club. A prison so calm, so quiet, so famously easy that even correctional officers joked it was the place you'd want to do time. California Men's Colony. CMC. A name that sounded less like a maximum security institution and more like a retreat in the hills of San Luis Obispo. But that was the lie, the surface story. Behind the eucalyptus trees, the rolling coastal breeze, and the postcard-perfect exterior, there was something else. Something older, darker, and more embedded than any official report dared to admit. Because inside CMC, some of the most dangerous men in California lived under one roof, quietly, strategically, and in ways that shocked even hardened investigators. And the moment things cracked, the moment a single secret leaked out, everything the public thought they knew about CMC was shattered. The hook that shook California. According to internal prison reports later obtained through public records requests, a correctional officer once said a line that would become infamous. CMC looks peaceful on the outside. But the most dangerous inmates are the quiet ones, the ones already planning something. Those words weren't recorded on tape. They weren't part of a press conference. They were written in an internal memo, after a violent incident so unexpected, and so revealing, that it forced the state to overhaul entire policies. The memo was part warning, part confession, and part mystery. Because no one could explain how a prison known for rehabilitation programs, educational workshops, and low-conflict populations had somehow become a breeding ground for organized crime operations stretching far beyond its walls. A prison built on contradictions. Officially, CMC was divided into two facilities. East Facility, medium security, program-heavy, often praised for its education and treatment programs. West Facility, more restrictive, housing inmates with violent histories, gang affiliations, and disciplinary problems. According to news reports and state documents, the West Side was where things got complicated. Not because it looked intimidating. Not because it echoed the brutality of notorious prisons like Pelican Bay or Corcoran. But because influence, real influence, wasn't always about razor wire or security levels. CMC was valuable. CMC was strategic. CMC had communication channels, blind spots, and routines that veteran gang members understood far too well. And for California's most powerful prison gangs, that made CMC the perfect chessboard. The unofficial history they didn't put on the brochures. To understand what happened inside CMC, you have to understand the ecosystem of California's prison gangs, something law enforcement has been trying to map for decades. According to state investigations, academic studies, and court filings. Major prison gangs often placed members in lower-profile prisons to run communications. Inmates with high-ranking positions sometimes requested transfers to facilities like CMC because movement was easier, monitoring was lighter, and staff-to-inmate ratios created exploitable gaps. Rival factions were often separated, but never perfectly. And even separation didn't stop planning. CMC became an intersection, a quiet one, but an intersection nonetheless. And intersections create traffic. Traffic creates opportunity. Opportunity creates problems. The smuggling pipeline. Smuggling inside state prisons isn't new. Phones, drugs, coded letters, synthetic substances, they all make their way in. But what made CMC unusual, according to investigative reporting from California newspapers and interviews with former officers, was the method. It wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It was systematic. Phones hidden inside legal mail envelopes. Contraband passing between housing units during medical appointments. Outside associates coordinating drops through coded messages about packages and appointments. And the most chilling discovery. A cluster of notes found during a routine cell search, written by a man with no known gang ties, no disciplinary history, and no reason to be on anyone's radar. The notes included nicknames of inmates across multiple facilities. Coded lists of approved couriers. And, most disturbingly, a hand-drawn map of the West facility's movement schedules. According to investigators, the map was accurate down to the minute. They still don't know who passed him the information. The man who wasn't supposed to matter. His pseudonym here is Luis Ortega, a name used for privacy, as the original case file referenced only initials and a CDCR number. Ortega was sentenced for burglary. nonviolent. First offense. A man who should have been on track for a quiet sentence at a low-security institution. But Ortega had one asset no one saw coming. He listened. And people talked. In the chow hall, in the education building, in the laundry unit, whispers came from men who'd been through Pelican Bay, Corcoran, Tehachapi, High Desert, war zones compared to CMC. Ortega didn't join them. He didn't want to. But he learned. And by learned, investigators later said he absorbed everything. Who had pull? Who ran what? Who answered to whom? He understood how small favors got traded for small loyalties, how small loyalties turned into small debts, and how small debts eventually became obligations. When the contraband pipeline expanded, Ortega wasn't running anything. But he knew who was. And that made him dangerous, not because he acted, but because he noticed. The night the system cracked. According to a redacted incident report from CMC's West facility, it happened around 8:47 p.m. A fight erupted in the day room. Not unusual. Not newsworthy. But what was unusual was the precision of it. 3 inmates. 3 different races. 3 different blocks. And all 3 attacked the same target, an inmate known publicly only by initials, but who investigators confirmed was a validated gang associate. The attack wasn't about race. Wasn't about territory. Wasn't even about personal conflict. It was about a message. But here's the twist. No one could confirm what the message was. The attackers refused to speak. The victim survived, barely, but refused protective custody. And the surveillance cameras caught something investigators still struggle to interpret. A 4th man. Standing off to the side. Watching. Not participating. Not running. Just watching. Ortega. Why would a non-violent offender be at the center of a violent incident? When officers reviewed the footage, they weren't looking for him. He wasn't on any list. Wasn't known for trouble. The kind of inmate staff said, you barely notice. But someone noticed him. A lieutenant reviewing the video wrote a handwritten note in the margin. Why is he standing right there? How did he know where to stand? Why wasn't he touched? That question became the spark. Because when they brought Ortega in for questioning, a standard procedure, he didn't ask why. He asked a different question. Am I in danger? According to officers present in the room, that was the moment the tone changed. Because he asked it with a calmness that didn't make sense. Usually, when inmates witness gang violence, they panic. They deny knowing anything. They claim they didn't see or weren't there. But Ortega already knew the implications. It meant someone thought he knew more than he was supposed to. And they were right. The secret he refused to say. When officers asked what he had seen, Ortega didn't give names. Didn't give details. He simply said, I think they wanted to warn somebody. Who? The investigator asked. Ortega stared at the table. And he didn't answer. Not because he didn't know, but because he knew exactly what answering meant. Inside a California prison, information is currency. Information is leverage. Information is danger. Saying the wrong thing could get him stabbed, targeted, or labeled. So he stayed silent. And that silence forced the investigators to dig deeper, something they admitted they hadn't done in years, because CMC didn't seem like the kind of prison where deep digging was necessary. But they were wrong. The rediscovered files. In the weeks after the incident, internal affairs officers began reviewing prior conflicts, prior confiscations, and prior disciplinary write-ups. What they found, according to public records later referenced in local reporting, was chilling. Coded notes passed between inmates in the chapel. Multiple burner phones discovered in the East facility. Letters mailed to addresses linked to known gang operatives. Transfers of inmates happening in patterns investigators called strategic coincidences. And most disturbing of all, movement patterns showing that rival gang members had somehow coordinated schedules without ever being in the same yard. CMC wasn't just housing dangerous men. It was hosting communications for people who weren't supposed to communicate. And the attack in the day room wasn't random. It was a warning, a controlled one. Which begged the question. Who controlled it? The prison with the wrong reputation. For decades, the public saw CMC as a mellow prison, a place where older inmates lived out their sentences, where men attended college classes, where the environment was calmer than the violent chaos of higher security prisons. And some of that reputation was deserved. There were real rehabilitation programs. Real educational achievements. Real success stories. But what the public didn't see, what was buried in internal audits and redacted investigative memos, was the truth. When you take men with high-level gang histories and place them in a structured, predictable environment, they don't become less dangerous. They become more strategic. CMC wasn't violent. It was calculated. And that calculation made it unpredictable. Who was pulling the strings? According to investigators, 3 major possibilities emerged, all unconfirmed but supported by patterns in the evidence. 1. A coordinated gang leadership node. CMC may have been used as a relay point, a safe zone for mid-level operatives to pass messages from high-security prisons to outside associates. 2. A localized power struggle. Multiple groups inside CMC may have been competing for control over the smuggling pipeline. 3. A ghost player. A non-validated inmate, someone like Ortega, may have been used as a messenger because he drew less attention. No one could agree on which theory fit. But all 3 explained the same chilling truth. Someone was planning something at CMC. Something big. Something organized. Something dangerous. And it all began to unravel with Ortega's quiet presence at the edge of a violent attack. The day Ortega disappeared from the yard. 3 days after the incident, Ortega didn't show up for morning chow. Didn't show up for work assignment. Didn't show up for yard. Officers found him sitting on his bunk with a note beside him. 1 line. Written in shaky handwriting. I shouldn't have watched. He hadn't harmed himself. He wasn't injured. He wasn't sick. He was terrified. According to a sergeant who later wrote an internal summary. His eyes looked like someone who'd been awake for days. He kept saying he didn't mean to stand there. He didn't mean to know anything. But he did. And someone else knew he did. The unsolved mystery of the second note. When officers searched Ortega's cell, they found something the official reports described only vaguely. A folded piece of paper taped under the bunk. Inside was a list of initials, 8 names represented only by letters. The last set of initials. His own. Next to his initials was a small check mark. No one has publicly confirmed what the list meant. Some officers believed it was a hit list. Others thought it was a communication chain. One investigator wrote that it looked like a delivery sequence. But whoever made that list knew Ortega had seen something. And that meant his time at CMC was officially over. He was transferred. No one was told where. Not even the investigators on the case. To this day, according to publicly available records, his name never reappeared in the CMC logs. Or the logs of any other California prison accessible through public databases. He simply vanished. The question that still haunts CMC. After the Ortega incident, after the violent attack, after the smuggling revelations, the internal power struggles, the coded communications, the unexplained transfers, after all of it, the state quietly made changes. Control measures. Movement adjustments. Reclassification reviews. But none of those changes answered the one question investigators never solved. What exactly was going on inside California Men's Colony, and who was orchestrating it? Because the attack on the day room wasn't the beginning. The smuggling pipeline wasn't the beginning. Ortega wasn't the beginning. They were symptoms. Symptoms of a structure no one could map. Or maybe, according to one unofficial theory whispered among older officers, a structure designed so that no outsider could map it. The file they weren't supposed to open. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. The morning after Ortega vanished from the yard, CMC carried on as if nothing had happened. Breakfast lines stayed quiet. The West Facility yard buzzed with its usual low hum, the kind of uneasy calm that correctional officers described as the silence before something you can't see. And for most inmates, life continued in the same repetitive rhythm: wake up, count time, chow, programs, yard, lockdown, sleep. But deep inside the administrative building, away from the clang of gates and the smell of disinfectant, something else was happening. Something that had never been meant for public eyes. A file was opened. A file that someone in authority hoped would stay buried. And inside that file was the first real clue to understanding what was ripping CMC open from the inside. The Internal Affairs interview that changed everything. Technically, Internal Affairs wasn't supposed to involve itself in routine inmate altercations unless weapons were used, staff were threatened, or evidence pointed to organized activity. None of those things were confirmed in the Ortega incident. At least, not officially. But one IA investigator, a woman known publicly only by a pseudonym used in later summaries, Investigator Hartman, didn't believe the reports. She'd been in the department for 19 years. Transferred across multiple institutions. Seen every type of prison politics imaginable. And she recognized patterns. When she reviewed the video from the dayroom attack, she froze the footage at the moment Ortega stood motionless, hands at his sides, watching the violence but untouched by it. Then she rewound it. Watched again. Paused again. Most officers saw nothing unusual. But she saw everything. The angle of Ortega's stance. The timing of his movements. His location relative to the attackers. His calmness. Hartman later told colleagues, according to a redacted debrief, that the moment she saw Ortega's body language, she felt a punch in her gut. He wasn't watching. He was waiting. Waiting for what, though? She didn't know. Not yet. But she knew she needed to find out. The file in the forgotten cabinet. Hartman requested access to historical contraband logs from the past decade, something most investigators didn't bother with because the paperwork was long, inconsistent, and often misleading. CMC had thousands of pages. Handwritten notes. Scanned disciplinary write-ups. Confiscation summaries. Random scraps of paper attached with staples. But buried in the back of a metal cabinet, one that hadn't been unlocked in years, she found a slim, worn folder. No label. No barcode. Just an old sticker with 3 faded letters. SCU. Special Circumstances Unit. Except CMC didn't have a Special Circumstances Unit. Not officially. And the folder looked older than half the staff. Inside were photocopies of investigative notes, inmate debrief summaries, time-stamped memos, and something else, something that chilled her. A map of CMC West Facility. Hand-drawn. Detailed. Too detailed. Movement patterns. Blind spots. Count times. Patrol rotations. Some of the handwriting was the same style officers had found hidden under Ortega's bunk. And one set of initials appeared repeatedly throughout the file. LO. She read it 3 times before realizing what it meant. Luis Ortega. But the notes were more than 10 years old. Ortega had only been sentenced recently. So what did LO stand for back then? Or who? The cold trail that refused to die. Hartman brought the file to her supervisor, but he brushed it off. Old stuff, he said. Probably an outdated operations plan. Could be misfiled. Could be from a training exercise. But Hartman knew better. She'd seen plenty of training packets. They were generic, broad, often useless. But this was specific. This was tailored. This was alive. And then she found the page that made her stop breathing for a moment. A list of inmate initials organized into sections. Communication intermediaries. Operational couriers. External relay points. Under operational couriers, she saw LO, primary runner, unconfirmed. Not the same LO as the modern-day Ortega. A different inmate. Someone who once held critical communication responsibilities for a group that wasn't identified by name, only symbolized by 3 lines in a triangular pattern. A coded mark. One that investigators later said was used by at least one high-level gang to denote trusted couriers who operated under the radar. Hartman sat back in her chair. A pattern was forming. Someone with initials LO had played a major role in covert communications years earlier. And now, a completely different inmate, Ortega, with the same initials, was suddenly caught in the middle of a suspiciously coordinated attack. Coincidence? Maybe. But in prison politics, coincidences often mean someone is sending a message. And the message had just landed in Hartman's lap. The prison politics you never see on TV. Most people imagine gang activity in prison as loud, visible, and violent. But according to academic research on California prison gangs, and according to officers with decades of experience, the real power exists in the shadows. In coded kites passed under doors. In subtle nods across the yard. In assignments for jobs that look harmless but aren't. In older inmates who never raise their voices but can start a riot with one conversation. CMC was supposed to be about programs, treatment, and a calmer population. But it also had a disproportionate number of long-term inmates who had aged out of violence but not influence. A structured daily routine that made timing predictable. Blind spots created unintentionally by rehabilitation-oriented layouts. Lower perceived risk, meaning fewer disruptions and fewer lockdowns. That made CMC perfect for one thing. Planning. Not action. Not execution. Planning. And the file Hartman found suggested that planning had been going on for a long time. Which raised the question no one wanted to ask. Was CMC being used as a hub, a communication headquarters, for something larger? The men who knew too much. Before she could continue reviewing the file, Hartman needed to talk to someone who had met Ortega. Not an officer. Not a supervisor. Someone who had interacted with him when he wasn't terrified. She walked to the education building and requested the instructor logs. CMC had a surprisingly sophisticated education program, something the prison publicized frequently, often proudly. And there she found him. Ortega had been enrolled in vocational carpentry, a small business course, and an optional creative writing workshop. That last one caught her eye. Creative writing wasn't mandatory. You signed up because you wanted to express something. Or, as some investigators knew, because you wanted an excuse to quietly receive and distribute paper without suspicion. The instructor, publicly identified only as Mr. R in later records, had taught at CMC for 14 years. When Hartman asked him about Ortega, he gave a strange answer. He wrote like a man who didn't want to say anything. But he wanted you to know that he could. Not helpful. But then the instructor leaned forward and said something else, something that made her skin prickle. I always had the feeling he was copying someone. Not plagiarizing, but echoing. Mimicking a voice that wasn't his. Whose voice? She asked. He shook his head. I don't know. But it wasn't a young burglar's voice. It was someone older. Someone more methodical. She asked for the writing samples. He hesitated, but eventually retrieved them. The first page Hartman read was enough to confirm her suspicion. Ortega was absorbing information. Echoing patterns. Mimicking communication styles. Which meant the orchestrators inside CMC weren't just using him. They were shaping him. Not to lead. But to remember. That was his danger. And his curse. A ghost from the past re-emerges. Back in her office, Hartman dug through the old file again, paying attention to the earliest pages. There, on page 3, she found something extraordinary. A short report about a former inmate, the original LO, who had disappeared from CMC years earlier under administrative transfer with sealed destination. The parallels were identical. He was nonviolent. First sentence. Little to no disciplinary history. Suddenly embedded in gang politics. Abruptly vanished. The file said the older LO overheard sensitive communications. The exact phrasing used in Ortega's verbal interview notes. And then she found the line that stopped her breathing again. Subject appears to have been present in the vicinity of orchestrated altercation. No confirmed participation. Possible watcher. Watcher. The same word used in the recent dayroom report. It was a pattern repeating itself over a decade. 2 men. Same initials. Same pattern of involvement. Same mysterious disappearance. If this was coincidence, it was the most elaborate one she'd ever seen. The theory no one wanted to say out loud. When patterns repeat in prison, they do so for a reason. Hartman considered two possibilities. Theory 1, a generational role. A position within the gang structure, a role called LO. A title passed down, not a name. Unconfirmed, but not impossible. Theory 2, a shadow network. Someone, or several someones, were selecting low-profile inmates to serve as watchers, information absorbers, and controlled messengers. Not leaders. Not soldiers. Witnesses. And witnesses, in prison politics, have a specific purpose. To remember what's said. And repeat it only when told. Ortega hadn't been silent because he was afraid of officers. He had been silent because he had been trained, intentionally or not, to stay silent. And the older LO had vanished for the same reason. The part of the file that was redacted before she even saw it. As Hartman worked through the pages, she noticed several sheets missing, cleanly removed. The table of contents referenced them. Page 12, Inmate Debrief, LO Interaction Number 2. Page 19, Unusual Yard Movement Grid. Page 24, Confiscated Note, Possible Command Pattern. All gone. Someone had reviewed this file long before she ever opened it. Someone had intentionally removed sections. Someone didn't want anyone to see the full picture. Which meant she was dealing with something far older, and far more guarded, than she realized. The prison staff who weren't talking. Hartman began interviewing officers who had been at CMC during the older LO's time. Most were retired. Some died. A few still worked there. But those who remained gave the same answer. I don't remember anything like that. I don't know who you're talking about. That file shouldn't exist. And one officer, a grizzled veteran with gray stubble and a coffee stain on his uniform, said something even stranger. You don't want to open that file, Hartman. Even if you read every page, you won't understand it. Because the people who wrote it don't work here anymore. And the people they watched. They're still here. Just quieter now. She asked what he meant. He didn't answer. He stood up. Walked away. Never filed an official statement. And a week later, he requested a transfer. The smuggling connection that shouldn't exist. While reviewing newer contraband logs, Hartman noticed something. CMC wasn't just receiving contraband. It was exporting it. Letters traced to CMC had been found in investigations in Kern Valley, Calipatria, Ironwood, even Pelican Bay. Each letter used similar coded structure. Not identical. Not obvious. But rhythmically similar. And in one case, a coded instruction found in Calipatria was a nearly perfect linguistic match to a letter found in Ortega's possession, a letter supposedly written by a childhood friend. Experts later stated the linguistic match was highly unlikely to be coincidence. Meaning someone in CMC was producing messages distributed across multiple facilities. Meaning CMC wasn't just a prison. It was a communication node. Possibly one of the most important ones. Possibly one that the state never saw. Until now. The shadow meeting. One night, around 9:20 p.m., Hartman walked past the administrative wing and saw two supervisors in a closed-door meeting. The blinds were down. Voices low. Tone anxious. She wasn't meant to hear anything. But the walls were thin. She paused. Listened. And caught a single sentence, spoken with fear, not authority. If she keeps digging, she's going to pull the old network back into the light. The old network. Not rumored. Not alleged. Named. Identified. Real. And they knew she was finding pieces of it. When the door opened, the conversation stopped instantly. The supervisor smiled. Too wide. Too staged. You're working late, one said. So are you, she replied. Their eyes flicked to the file in her hands. And that's when she knew. Someone didn't want her to open that cabinet. Someone didn't want her reading those pages. Someone didn't want the old patterns resurfacing. And someone inside CMC, inmate or staff, had reasons to keep that file buried. The name Ortega never spoke. The next morning, Hartman received a message from a sergeant. You asked Ortega if he thought he was in danger. He never told you who he was afraid of. He left something out. She met the sergeant immediately. He brought her a memo written the day Ortega was transferred. In the memo was a transcription of Ortega's final statements before being removed from CMC. He said only one sentence. Someone called me the wrong name. What name? She asked the sergeant. We don't know, he said. He refused to repeat it. Just said it wasn't his name. But the way he said it. The sergeant hesitated. It was like the name belonged to someone else. Someone he didn't want to be mistaken for. Another LO. Another watcher. Another ghost. The file with no origin. That night, Hartman flipped through the old folder again. And on the very last page, stuck to the back cover, she found a small handwritten note, barely legible. If this file is reopened, the pattern starts again. It wasn't signed. But the handwriting matched the older LO's letters. Meaning he knew the pattern would return. Meaning he knew someone else would fill his role. Meaning Ortega didn't stumble into danger. He was assigned to it. Maybe not officially. Maybe not knowingly. But functionally. Because CMC wasn't chaotic. It was structured. Not by staff. But by forces no one wanted to admit existed. And that structure was waking up again. The Men in the Blue Notebook. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. The day after Hartman found the handwritten warning, if this file is reopened, the pattern starts again, CMC woke up to fog rolling in so thick it felt like the prison was floating in the clouds. Fog at CMC was normal. Fog that made visibility drop to 10 feet wasn't. Officers joked that it was San Luis Obispo camouflage. Inmates said it made the place feel like a ghost town. But for Hartman, it was something else. A sign. CMC always changed when the fog rolled in. Movements slowed. Conversations hushed. And men who normally walked in loud, territorial clusters broke into smaller, more secretive groups. It was like the weather reminded them of everything unspoken, the things that lived in the cracks of the prison. And that morning, something new crept out of those cracks. A name she'd never heard before. A name tied to both the past and present. A name that would change the entire investigation. The Men with the Blue Notebook. The note passed during morning medical line. It started with a small yellow post-it note slipped under Hartman's office door. No envelope. No signature. Just a short message. Talk to Unit C nurse. He saw something. Normally, anonymous notes were ignored. Most were pranks or petty inmate feuds. But this one was different. It wasn't on inmate paper. It wasn't written in the messy scrawl inmates used for kites. This handwriting was controlled. Precise. Almost too clean. Like someone who didn't want to be identified had taken extra care to disguise themselves. Hartman headed straight for Unit C, the medical wing serving the West facility. The nurse on duty was a man named Foster. Tall. Gray-haired. Moved like someone who'd seen enough of prison life to be unfazed by anything. When she asked if he'd left her the note, he gave a flat, tired answer. I don't leave anonymous notes. I barely leave on time. But before she walked away, he added something, low, quiet, careful. But if someone told you I saw something, maybe I did. She glanced around. The unit was active. Inmates waiting. Officers watching. Step inside, he said, leading her into the supply closet, the only room with no cameras. Then he told her something she would later call the first thread in the new web. The Men with the Blue Notebook. Foster said that 3 days before the Ortega incident, 3 days before the attack, the disappearance, the panic, he saw something during morning medication line. A man walked up to the nurse's window with a small blue notebook tucked under his arm. Not the cheap paper pads inmates normally carried. Not a state-issued spiral-bound workbook. Something different. Hardcover. Deep navy. Edges worn, but not prison worn. It looked imported. And the men holding it. Not someone Foster had seen carrying anything before. Not a known detail-heavy inmate. Not someone who ever showed interest in writing materials. But most importantly, he wasn't supposed to be in that medical line at all. He didn't have a prescription. Didn't have a chronic care designation. Didn't have a sick call slip. But he stood there. Quiet. Unmoving. Like he belonged. Only after reviewing the roster later did Foster realize. The man was from a different housing unit. A unit that didn't have morning medical that day. Meaning he had crossed through movement gates without authorization. Meaning someone let him through. Meaning someone wanted him there. When Foster described him, Hartman's pulse changed. Tall. Early 40s. Salt and pepper hair. A calm face. Eyes that looked more tired than dangerous. She recognized the description instantly. Because she'd seen that face one time, in the old, half-faded photographs from the Special Circumstances Unit file. A man referenced only as Subject K. A figure who appeared loosely associated with the older LO. A figure who had been mentioned in scattered, cryptic notes across multiple years, always described the same way. Quiet. Observant. Not a soldier. Not a shot caller. Something else. The man with the blue notebook. A ghost from the old file. She raced back to her office, grabbed the aging file, and flipped to a page she'd skimmed earlier, a blurry photocopy of a 12-year-old incident report. There he was. Subject K. No real name. No inmate number. No details. Just a sketch created by an officer, rough lines, tired eyes, a composed posture. He watches, the officer had written. Doesn't speak unless spoken to. Moves between units without causing friction. And now he was back. Still moving quietly. Still present in places he wasn't scheduled to be. Still holding something he shouldn't have. A notebook. Not a kite. Not a scrap of paper. A whole notebook. A notebook big enough to hold instructions, coded logs, or historical memory. A notebook that multiple inmates would later refer to mysteriously as the ledger. Why a notebook matters in prison. Contraband phones are dangerous. Drugs are dangerous. Homemade weapons are dangerous. But in organized prison crime, the most dangerous contraband is far less obvious. Information. Information written down isn't just notes. It's proof. It's continuity. It's power. But written information is also a liability. It can be confiscated, read, used, or exposed. Which is why real gang instructions are rarely kept on paper. But this notebook existed. And men were talking about it. Too quietly. Too carefully. As though the notebook itself held something none of them wanted to speak aloud. Something that tied the old LO. To the new LO. To Ortega. To whatever structure existed beneath CMC's calm surface. The notebook wasn't just contraband. It was a blueprint. The name no one wrote down. Hartman knew she needed to identify Subject K officially. But every search produced nothing. No inmate matching his physical description was currently housed in CMC West facility. No one in East facility matched either. She checked archives, years of inmate rosters, and found no direct match. But in one line item from 2008, she found something nearly invisible. K. Reyes, admin, transfer. Destination sealed. No photo. No reason for transfer. No follow-up. But Reyes, even as a pseudonym, matched the sketch. Matched the handwriting on the notebook pages in the SCU file. Matched multiple mentions of a K interacting with the older LO. If Subject K was Reyes, he had vanished from the system. But the man with the blue notebook wasn't a ghost. He was real. He was here. And he was crossing units without authorization. That meant either someone was giving him access. Someone was looking the other way. He had influence strong enough to move unnoticed. Any of those options spelled trouble. But all three. A silent warning. The officer who knew his face. Later that afternoon, while scanning CMC entrance logs, Hartman was approached by Officer Dunley, a veteran CO known for having a flawless memory for faces. "You're asking about a guy with a blue notebook," he said, adjusting his belt. "You might want to check something." He pulled out a folded sheet of paper, a confiscation log from only 2 days earlier. At the bottom. One notebook seized, navy blue cover, possession of inmate, name redacted. Item destroyed. But the description wasn't what made her heart skip. The officer's note did. Subject said the notebook wasn't his. Said he was holding it for Blue. "Blue?" she asked. Dunley nodded. "Blue ain't a person," he said. "Blue is a position." He leaned closer. "And if he's back? We're in trouble." She didn't understand. Not yet. But he kept going. In the old days, according to the guys who worked Pelican Bay, Blue was the one who kept the records. The one who tracked dues, debts, messages, who owed who crossed who. A human ledger. "So a bookkeeper?" she asked. "No," Dunley said, shaking his head. "A memory keeper. A historian. A walking archive." "And you're saying someone at CMC has that job?" He didn't hesitate. "I'm saying he never left." The ledger theory. That night, Hartman spread every file across her desk, old SCU documents, modern reports, contraband logs, photos, rosters, and tried to connect the dots. A pattern emerged that chilled her. CMC wasn't a hub because of its violence. CMC was a hub because of its memory. A place where long-term inmates aged out of conflict but not knowledge. Movement was predictable. Surveillance was light. Old relationships quietly persisted. Information could be stored, passed, and preserved. If Reyes, Subject K, the men with the blue notebook, had returned, then this wasn't a new network forming. This was an old one resurfacing. The same one that used the older LO. The same one Ortega stumbled into. The same one a decade of officials tried to bury by sealing files, hiding transfers, and hoping the patterns would fade. The ledger, the notebook, wasn't a tool. It was continuity. A continuity someone resurrected. And if someone resurrected it, they were preparing for something. The inmate who wouldn't look up. The next morning, Hartman went to West Facility B Yard, the yard where rumors tended to leak like steam through cracks. She didn't talk to inmates. That violated protocol. But inmates talked anyway. Not to her. To each other. And when a woman like Hartman walked across the yard, they talked quietly enough that only someone who understood prison body language knew how to listen. One man, an older inmate with weathered tattoos and a limp, glanced at her, then quickly looked away. Too quickly. She recognized the gesture immediately. He knew something. So she didn't approach him. Approaching someone openly marks them. Instead, she walked past casually, pretending to check gate locks. When she neared him, she heard a whisper, so faint she almost thought she imagined it. "You're looking for the wrong man. The notebook ain't his. He just carries it." She stopped walking. Not visibly. Not obviously. But inwardly, her mind froze. Someone else controlled the notebook. Someone higher. Someone invisible. Someone whose initials were never in any file. Then the inmate added something else, 5 words that clarified nothing but changed everything. Blue ain't a person anymore. What does that even mean? Back in her office, she replayed those 5 words in her mind. Blue ain't a person anymore. If Blue wasn't a person, what was he? A title. A role. A symbol. A network. The inmate's cryptic warning pointed to something structural, something organized at a level she'd never expected in a prison known publicly for being calm. Then she remembered something from the SCU file. A scribbled note written by the older LO. Blue decides who remembers. It wasn't a job description. It was a power description. And if the ledger had returned, it meant the position had been revived. Not by accident. By intention. But why? The yard that froze for a moment. The following day, just before afternoon recreation, something unusual happened. The yard fell silent. Not quiet. Silent. Men stopped mid-conversation. Stopped mid-movement. Stopped mid-stride. Officers felt it before they saw it. Every long-term CO knows the difference between normal yard noise, tension, and whatever this was. Then the cause appeared. A single inmate walked across the center of the yard with a familiar navy blue notebook under his arm. Not Subject K. Someone else entirely. A man Hartman had never seen before. He wasn't muscular. Wasn't intimidating. No visible gang tattoos. Just a thin man in his 30s with sharp eyes and steady hands. As he crossed, not a single inmate made eye contact. Not one. Not even the men who normally ran the yard's social structure. And that told her everything. The man with the notebook wasn't the leader. But he had a leader's protection. Or a leader's fear. And when he reached the far end of the yard, near the chapel, another inmate stepped out. A man with salt and pepper hair. Calm expression. Tired eyes. Subject K. Reyes. Blue. The notebook carrier stopped. Opened the notebook. Held it out. Reyes didn't touch it. Didn't lean in. Didn't show recognition. He simply nodded once. The kind of nod men give when confirming something unspoken. Something planned. Something already decided. Hartman watched all of it from the tower platform. Her radio crackled. "You seeing this?" a CO asked. "Yes," she said. "I'm seeing it." But what she meant was, "I'm seeing the network. Alive. Unified. Functional." And then it hit her. The notebook wasn't a ledger of debts. It was a ledger of instructions. A living map of influence. A record of who owed what, who controlled who, and who remembered what needed remembering. And in that moment, for the first time, she understood the scale. CMC wasn't a prison with gang influence. CMC was an archive. A repository for knowledge that didn't exist on paper anywhere else in the state. A strategic memory hub for organized criminal communication. And it had just restarted. Why the network was resurrected. After the yard incident, Hartman spent hours reviewing statewide prison events, trying to identify a trigger. Was there a massive transfer somewhere? A leadership fall? A riot? An external courtroom event? It took her nearly 2 days. But she found it. 1 week before the Ortega attack, one of the highest-ranking gang coordinators in Pelican Bay had been moved to a medical facility downstate pending a long-term evaluation. That move, according to experts quoted in news reports, created a temporary vacuum in leadership structures. A vacuum that required communication. A vacuum that needed stability. A vacuum that made CMC valuable again. Because if the ledger existed, if the notebook existed, if Subject K still held influence, then CMC was the perfect place to re-establish continuity. Quiet. Overlooked. Underestimated. A perfect storm. And Ortega. He had simply stepped into the wrong corridor at the wrong time. Or the right corridor at the wrong time. Or, more chillingly, the exact corridor someone wanted him to walk through. The watcher that shouldn't exist. 2 nights later, as Hartman reviewed surveillance footage of the yard incident, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. A man standing behind Subject K. Not interacting. Not speaking. Just watching. Watching the exchange. Watching the notebook. Watching Reyes. A watcher. The same type of watcher the old file described. The same type of watcher Ortega had accidentally become. And the same type of watcher who once shadowed the older LO. There were always watchers. Always runners. Always ledgers. Always blue. The network didn't recruit. It replicated. And it had replicated again. The moment Hartman admitted the truth. By midnight, she sat alone in her office, lights dimmed, the old SCU file open in front of her. She whispered a sentence out loud, the sentence she had avoided saying for days. California Men's Colony isn't hiding a gang. It's hiding a system. Not a new one. An inherited one. A system that lived in knowledge, not violence. A system that rewarded listeners, not fighters. A system that preserved information through people. Ortega had been pulled into the system accidentally, or deliberately. The older LO had vanished through the system. The ledger keeper, Blue, had returned to reactivate the system. And the man with the notebook wasn't the threat. The man who didn't need the notebook was. Subject K. Reyes. The one who nodded. The one who remembered. The one the officers thought was gone. And Hartman knew one last thing. If she kept digging, the system would notice. And it would watch her back. End of Chapter 3. Ready for Chapter 4 when you want it. You said. Start Chapter 4, minimum of 2,500 words. ChatGPT said. Absolutely, diving straight into Chapter 4, full force, fully cinematic, fully narrative, and meeting the 2,500+ word minimum. No delays. No stage directions. No meta talk. Here we go. Chapter 4, The Whisper That Broke the Silence. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. Fog still hung low over CMC the morning the whisper began. Not a rumor. Not a kite. A whisper. And if you've ever spent time around hardened prison staff, the kind who stay long enough to understand the rhythms of a place, they'll tell you. There are 3 kinds of inmate whispers. The first? Harmless gossip. Who got moved? Who got caught? Who lost a visit? The second? Political shifts, subtle changes in who controls what, who's rising, who's fading. But the third whisper? The rare one. The dangerous one. It doesn't start loud. Doesn't spread quickly. It moves quietly. Smoothly. Strategically. It moves like people who don't want to be noticed are making sure you do notice. That's what happened that morning. A whisper moved across CMC with too much coordination to be accidental. And that whisper was about one thing. Blue is choosing someone new. The first warning came from a janitor. The day started with a knock on Hartman's office door. A single tap, soft, almost apologetic. When she opened it, a janitor stood there. Gray uniform. Quiet posture. No eye contact. In CMC, janitors were inmates. Usually older. Usually low risk. Usually the kind who stayed out of trouble because they wanted to survive until parole. This one's name tag read Harper. He didn't step inside. Didn't speak unless she nodded. But when she did, he said one sentence, a sentence so strange she thought she'd misheard. They're saying Blue's picking a new memory. A new memory. Not a new leader. Not a new runner. Not a new messenger. A new memory. Hartman didn't react outwardly, she'd learned never to show emotion in front of inmates, but inside her chest, something tightened. What does that mean? She asked. Harper swallowed. His eyes flicked down the hall. And then he whispered. You know exactly what it means. Then he walked away. Not fast. Not suspiciously. Just steady. Careful. The kind of walk a man uses when he knows someone's watching him, and that someone might not be the staff. The meaning of a new memory. The phrase echoed in her head. A new memory. In the SCU file from more than a decade ago, the older LO had written. Blue decides who remembers. Meaning. Blue designated a keeper. Not of money. Not of contraband. Of knowledge. A walking archive. A human ledger. Someone who could carry the structure without ever writing it down. When the older LO vanished, the memory roll ended. When Ortega appeared at the scene of the attack, unknowingly in the same position the older LO once stood, the pattern restarted. And when the men with the blue notebook crossed the yard. That wasn't Blue himself. That was the courier. The carrier. The messenger. But the memory? The one Blue selected. That was something else. Someone else. Someone who had to be trained. Prepared. Positioned. Hidden. The system was preparing to absorb a new person. And if that system was awakening, Hartman wasn't just watching history repeat. She was watching history migrate. The surveillance footage that shouldn't exist. Later that afternoon, Hartman decided to review surveillance footage of the yard incident again. Not because she expected new revelations, but because something felt off. Something subtle. She replayed the footage frame by frame. Blue, Subject K, walked smoothly through the yard. The courier with the notebook followed a few feet behind. And as they approached the chapel, the whole yard froze. Men stopped talking. Stopped walking. Stopped breathing. But while watching the background, the parts most people ignored, she noticed a detail that made her lean closer to the screen. A man in a corner of the yard, thin, young, nervous, stood completely still. He wasn't watching Blue. Wasn't watching the notebook. He was watching Ortega. Except Ortega wasn't even in the yard. He had already been transferred. Meaning this footage wasn't the same day as the notebook exchange. It was from a week earlier. The same week the older LO's pattern reactivated. Hartman zoomed in on the young inmate's face. She ran it through the inmate roster. No match. Then she checked the weekly transfer log. There he was. Miguel Casares, transferred out the next morning. Destination sealed. The exact same pattern as the older LO. Ortega. Subject K during his disappearance years ago. A watcher. The transfer was too fast to be coincidence. Someone had removed him from the board. The system was moving pieces. The officer who broke protocol to tell her the truth. Around 6 p.m., Officer Dunley found her in the hallway, the same officer who'd told her Blue wasn't a person anymore. "Walk with me," he said. She followed him outside near the maintenance yard, where older equipment sat rusting under the late afternoon sun. He turned his back to the cameras. "Something's happening," he said. "And I don't know who to trust anymore." Hartman waited. Dunley rubbed his forehead. "You asked me about Blue. And I told you Blue used to be a person. That was true. But you need to understand something, Blue also became a code. A position. A function." She nodded slowly. "And Blue isn't chosen," he said. "Blue chooses." He let that hang. Then he added. "And when Blue chooses a new memory, it means the old one is gone." Hartman's pulse thudded. "The old one," she repeated. "You mean Ortega?" Dunley shook his head. "No. Not him. He was never the real memory. He was a test. A placeholder. A way to see who was watching the inquisitive ones. Then who was the real old memory?" she asked. Dunley lowered his voice. "Reyes. Subject K. Blue. The ledger. The ghost. He wasn't the leader. He was the memory holder. And if they were choosing a new memory, it meant Reyes was preparing to pass on the knowledge. Pass on the structure. Pass on the entire archive. And knowledge like that, it only moves when something big is coming. The San Luis Obispo incident. 3 days later, a news report broke out of San Luis Obispo County. A high-ranking gang figure at another facility had been assaulted, not murdered, not publicly brutalized, but quietly, surgically. The assault didn't happen at CMC. It didn't even happen in the same region. But it rippled through the state prisons. Because the victim was one of the few remaining original lieutenants from a gang faction that had once coordinated with the older LO. And whoever assaulted him didn't finish the job. They sent a message. A message inside state insiders recognized immediately. The board is resetting. The chessboard. The hierarchy. The memory structure. Hartman saw the article and immediately felt a chill. CMC wasn't reacting to the assault. CMC had predicted it. Possibly influenced it. Possibly planned around it. And Blue, Reyes, was preparing to hand off responsibility. Which meant someone at CMC was being groomed to receive a level of knowledge that could change the structure of prison coordination across California. The quiet inmate no one paid attention to. At 10:11 a.m. the next morning, a new inmate entered the education building. Skinny. Late 20s. Short hair. No tattoos. Eyes that didn't look hardened or violent, they looked analytical. He walked into a classroom and sat at the back. Didn't speak. Didn't shift. Didn't appear nervous. But Hartman watched from the hallway. And just like the notebook carrier. Just like the old LO years ago. Just like Ortega before everything unraveled. This young man wasn't enrolled in that class. He had no reason to be there. He had crossed units he wasn't assigned to. He had stepped into the orbit of men tied to the network. He was silent. Observant. Absorbing. Hartman's heart sank. She knew it instantly. He was being watched. Tested. Selected. A new memory. A new LO. The role was being passed on. And the unnerving thing. He didn't look dangerous at all. He looked ordinary. Forgettable. Exactly the kind of man the system wanted. The interview with the chaplain. CMC's chapel was one of the few places inmates from different units sometimes crossed paths. So Hartman visited the chaplain, a soft-spoken man who had been at CMC for years and had seen inmate politics shift without being part of them. When she described the young inmate from the education building, the chaplain frowned. "I've seen him," he said. "But not here. Not in chapel. He doesn't attend services. He doesn't meet with groups. He sits outside during yard movement and watches." "Watches what?" she asked. "People," he said. Quietly. Methodically. "Does he talk to anyone?" "No. They talk to him." "How?" The chaplain leaned forward. "They sit near him, say nothing, then leave. Like they're creating a presence around him. A presence. A circle. A structure." She felt a pressure in the air, like she was standing at the edge of a cliff and couldn't see the bottom. "And he doesn't react?" she asked. "No," the chaplain said softly. "He just remembers." The invisible initiation. That afternoon, Hartman left her office and walked toward Unit A, where the young inmate had last been seen. As she turned the corner, she froze. 4 inmates stood in a semicircle around him. Close enough to intimidate. Far enough to avoid suspicion. Their hands were relaxed. Their expressions calm. Nothing overt happened. But their body language said everything. A silent initiation. A recognition ritual. Not violent. Not marked. But unmistakable. The young inmate didn't speak. Didn't nod. Didn't acknowledge them. He simply stood still. Absorbing. Like all the memories before him. And then something subtle happened, something tiny but enormous. Reyes walked past the group. Didn't stop. Didn't look directly at them. But as he passed the young inmate, he brushed 2 fingers along the back of his own hand, a gesture so small it could have been mistaken for a scratch. The young inmate saw it. And blinked once. A silent response. A confirmation. A passing of the first key. Reyes had chosen him. Blue had chosen a new memory. The network had begun its transfer. And the young man, whoever he was, wasn't even aware of the weight he was absorbing. Hartman felt her stomach twist. She'd seen dangerous men. Seen violent offenders. Seen gang shot callers. But she had never seen anything like this. A knowledge transfer. An inheritance. A succession. CMC wasn't hiding a gang. CMC was hiding a structure of memory. And the new memory had just been chosen. The whisper that confirmed everything. As the men dispersed, an older inmate walked past Hartman, broom in hand. He didn't look at her. He didn't break stride. But as he passed, he muttered 2 words under his breath. "It's starting." She turned sharply. What's starting? She demanded. He paused just long enough to respond. The rewrite. Then he kept walking. And she finally understood. The network wasn't just passing on knowledge. It was updating it. Reframing it. Preparing for the next era. A new memory wasn't about preserving the past. It was about shaping the future. And whatever future CMC's network was planning. It wasn't small. It wasn't local. It wasn't accidental. It was strategic. Coordinated. Organized. A recalibration of influence. And if she didn't move now, right now, she would lose the ability to stop it. Because once the memory was fully transferred, once the ledger was internalized, once the knowledge migrated into the young inmate's mind, you couldn't confiscate it. You couldn't intercept it. You couldn't isolate it. You couldn't erase it. You couldn't stop it. Because you can't arrest a memory. The transfer that never happened. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. By the time the sun rose over San Luis Obispo the next morning, CMC felt different. Something in the air shifted. Not loud. Not visible. But deeply, unnervingly present. Officers walked the yard with straighter posture. Inmates moved in tighter clusters. And even the fog, which usually lingered lazily over the hills, peeled back faster than normal, as if the weather itself didn't want to be part of what was unfolding. The system inside CMC, the hidden network Hartman had been tracing, was no longer in its beginning phase. It was now in motion. The new memory, that skinny young inmate with the analytical eyes, had already begun attracting quiet attention. But something else began that morning. Something that made the hair on the back of Hartman's neck rise before she even knew why. CMC announced a transfer. Just one. A routine movement. A low-level inmate, supposedly being moved to a different facility for population management reasons. The officer reading the list didn't blink. But Hartman did. Because the inmate listed for transfer didn't exist. The name that shouldn't be there. The transfer list read: Casares, Miguel, transferring immediately. But that was impossible. Miguel Casares, the silent watcher she saw in the footage, had already been transferred a week earlier. His destination was sealed. He had vanished from the system. And yet, here he was. Again. Listed as if he had never left. As if time had reversed. As if someone had rewritten reality. Hartman approached the shift sergeant reading the list. That's wrong, she said. He looked at her, confused. What do you mean? That inmate is gone. Transferred last week. I reviewed the paperwork. The sergeant frowned, flipping through his clipboard. No, he's here. Housing Unit A, 213. He's scheduled for transport in, he glanced at his watch, 40 minutes. Housing Unit A. The same unit where the new memory had been spotted. Her pulse kicked. How long has he been back? She demanded. Back, the sergeant repeated. He never left. Her mind raced. Either. The transfer record from last week was fake. This transfer order was fake. Someone was using his name for cover. Casares had a twin, he didn't. Or the system was moving people so quietly even staff didn't realize it. None of the options made sense. None were safe. And all pointed to one conclusion. The network was manipulating official records. And someone inside CMC was helping. The officer who looked away. Hartman headed straight for Housing Unit A. A correctional officer stood at the door, Officer Bridges, a man she barely knew but recognized as steady, unremarkable, and extremely by the book. Exactly the type who never broke protocol. But when she told him she needed to check inmate Casares' location, he hesitated. Not confusion. Not resistance. Fear. Ma'am, are you sure you want to do that? His voice was low. Uneasy. She narrowed her eyes. What's in A213? She asked. Bridges wet his lips. The kid, he whispered. The new one. The one the yard's been watching. The new memory. Her stomach dropped. What does he have to do with Casares? I don't know, Bridges whispered. But yesterday Casares wasn't on my roster. Today he is. And the kid hasn't left his cell since last night. And you didn't report the discrepancy. Bridges took a breath so heavy it sounded like a plea. Ma'am, there's a difference between not reporting something and knowing I shouldn't report it. The network had reached him. Not through bribery. Not through threats. Through silence. Fear. Presence. CMC officers knew when something bigger than them was moving. And right now, something very big was moving. The cell that didn't match the roster. Hartman entered Unit A. The air was stale. The fluorescent lights flickered. And inside the unit, inmates moved carefully, like they were afraid to disturb invisible lines. She approached cell A-213. Before she could even reach it, she heard the rustle of paper. A quiet, steady sound. Writing. Someone inside was writing. She looked through the narrow window. And there he was. The new memory in training. Thin. Focused. Eyes locked on a lined notebook. Not blue, not old, but brand new and empty except for the words he was carving into it. 3 names. 3 dates. 3 locations. Hartman couldn't read them fully. But she recognized the middle name. Ortega. Her throat tightened. The new memory was rewriting history. Or documenting it. Or replacing it. And then she noticed something else. There was no second bed in the cell. No property that belonged to Casares. No signs anyone else had lived there. Yet the roster claimed otherwise. 2 inmates assigned. 1 present. The other never existed. Or disappeared. Or was being used as camouflage. Meaning the network had begun hiding people inside empty paper records. Meaning someone could vanish inside the prison without leaving the prison. Meaning the problem wasn't transfers. It was erasures. The note slid under the door. Before she could move, a sheet of folded paper slid out under the inmate's door as if shoved by an invisible hand. Hartman froze. The inmate didn't move. Didn't look up. Didn't acknowledge her. The paper simply appeared. She knelt and picked it up. It was blank. But only for a moment. As she tilted it toward the light, faint indentations appeared, writing pressed from the other side of the page. A message he had written before tearing off the top sheet. A message someone was meant to read with care. She carefully traced it with her eyes. He didn't leave. He was never here. Stop looking for ghosts. A chill crawled up her spine. The message wasn't a threat. It was a warning. A correction. A reminder that she was following the wrong thread. Casares wasn't important. He was a shadow. The network was using him, and probably dozens of others, as placeholders. Names that moved without bodies. Bodies that moved without names. A system of camouflage. A system of erasure. A system of memory manipulation. If you couldn't trust the rosters, you couldn't trust anything. And if the new memory could rewrite the history of who existed within the prison, he could rewrite anything. The clerk who knew too much. It wasn't until late afternoon that she found the next clue. A prison clerk, another inmate, mid-40s, quiet, meticulous, approached her while she stood near the administrative corridor. He didn't speak. Just nodded toward a side hallway. She followed. In the empty hallway, he finally opened his mouth. You're chasing the wrong man. Then who should I be chasing? Hartman asked. He shook his head. Not a who. A when. She frowned. What does that mean? The clerk looked around nervously. Transfers are clocks, he said softly. When they happen, when they don't. Who gets moved? Who gets placed? But you're looking at names. You need to look at timing. She didn't understand. He continued. The network doesn't hide people. They hide patterns. And the moment a pattern is broken, someone gets erased. And Casares, she asked. He's not a person anymore, the clerk said. He's a time marker. A timestamp. A placeholder. A signal. We've had 4 fake transfers in the last 2 months, the clerk whispered. All with sealed destinations. All disappearing from the system. All replaced by new names that never passed intake. Her pulse quickened. Why? The clerk swallowed hard. Because Blue is preparing to move. And when Blue moves, the memory shifts. And when the memory shifts, people vanish. The pattern in the timestamps. Back in her office, Hartman printed every transfer log from the past 90 days. She covered her desk in them, rows of names, dates, reasons, destinations. Most looked normal. Some didn't. She noticed the first anomaly instantly. 3 transfers on the 4th of the month. All with sealed destinations. All from different units. All labeled population management. Then another cluster. 2 transfers from West facility. 1 from East. All on the 19th. All redacted. Then the last one. Casares. Today. Another 19th. Another redaction. A pattern. Every transfer associated with the hidden network occurred on the 4th or the 19th. She scribbled the dates onto paper. And that's when she saw it. Not dates. Not transfers. Coordinates. I'm not looking for ghosts, she whispered. I'm looking for a map. The transfer dates formed a pattern of movement, like the ticking of a metronome. And the metronome pointed to one thing. Reyes. Subject K. Blue. He was orchestrating transfers that weren't transfers. Movements that weren't movements. Disappearances that weren't disappearances. He was preparing for a relocation. Not of himself. But of the memory. The secret meeting in the blind spot. CMC had blind spots. Every prison does. Corners where cameras don't reach. Places where old buildings block the view. Hallways designed in ways modern surveillance didn't anticipate. One particular blind spot sat behind the chapel, a narrow service corridor that existed on architectural drawings but not on security maps. Hartman knew it because she once heard a senior officer mention it in passing. So she went there. She wasn't supposed to. No one was supposed to. And what she saw made her heart slam into her ribs. 3 inmates stood in the blind spot. Not whispering. Not passing contraband. Teaching. Reyes stood at the center. Calm. Hands folded. Eyes patient. The notebook courier stood beside him. And the young inmate, the new memory, stood across from them, listening. Learning. Absorbing. Reyes wasn't passing a physical object. He was passing content. Knowledge. Structure. History. It was a classroom. A secret classroom. A place where memory was being transferred from one generation to the next. She couldn't hear their words. But she didn't have to. She recognized the body language. Reyes was explaining. The courier was demonstrating. The new memory was repeating. It was a ritual. A rite. A ceremony. A succession. And that's when she saw the final piece. A 4th man stood further back. Still. Silent. The watcher. Every network ceremony had a watcher. Just like Ortega had been. Just like the older LO once had one. A witness. A recorder. A backup. Hartman felt her throat tighten. This is bigger than I thought, she whispered. But bigger didn't cover it. This wasn't a gang. This wasn't a group. This wasn't an alliance. This was an institution. A system older than the current inmates. A system older than half the staff. A system that survived crackdowns, transfers, and sealed files by passing its memory through people rather than paper. And now that system was rewriting itself. The real reason for the fake transfers. She understood it now. The fake transfers weren't hiding people. They were hiding steps in the succession process. Each transfer marked A lesson given. A task completed. A piece of knowledge absorbed. A phase of training finished. The dates weren't random. They were milestones. The system wasn't erasing inmates. It was marking the timeline of memory inheritance. And Casares? He wasn't being moved. He was being used. His name was a symbol. A timestamp. A way to hide the true movements of the new memory. If she continued following the false trail, she would always be 10 steps behind. The unexpected interruption. Just as Reyes raised a hand to gesture toward the notebook courier, a shadow fell across the corridor. Another officer. A tall one. One she didn't recognize. He wasn't supposed to be there either. He stepped into the blind spot silently, his boots barely making a sound. Reyes glanced at him. The courier froze. The new memory's posture tightened, subtly but noticeably. And the watcher. The watcher straightened like a wire pulled taut. Something was wrong. The officer didn't speak. Didn't yell. Didn't challenge. Didn't break protocol. He just nodded once, slowly. A signal. A warning. A confirmation. Reyes responded with a nod of his own. Then, without a single word, the group dissolved. Like smoke. Like shadows. Like ghosts. Within seconds the corridor was empty. Too empty. The kind of empty that feels orchestrated. Planned. Expected. Hartman stepped deeper into the blind spot. The officer was gone too. Because he hadn't been an officer. He was part of the network. A plant. A shield. A protector. CMC wasn't infiltrated by the network. CMC was housing it. The moment Hartman realized she was in danger. Alone now in the blind spot, she looked down and noticed a small scrap of notebook paper on the ground. She picked it up. On it were 3 words. You're too close. Not written in threat. Written in warning. The network had seen her. Identified her. Tracked her movements. And now it was telling her, politely, almost respectfully, to step back. But she couldn't. Because she finally understood the truth. This wasn't a story about a prison gang. This was a story about a memory empire. And CMC was its library. And the new memory? He was almost ready. End of chapter 5. Say, start chapter 6 when you want the next installment. You said. Start chapter 6, minimum of 2,500 words. ChatGPT said. Got you, full immersion, full tension, full cinematic pacing. Here comes chapter 6, delivered in one continuous 500+ word narrative. No stage directions. No meta-commentary. Pure story. Chapter 6, The Men Who Shouldn't Exist in the System. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. There's a strange thing that happens when a prison gets too quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Not nighttime quiet. But that thick, unnatural quiet, the kind that feels like the air is holding its breath. CMC hit that level of silence the morning after the blind spot meeting. Not a calm silence. A waiting silence. Officers felt it in the way inmates walked slower, more measured. Inmates felt it in the way officers scanned the yard more often, their radios clipped a little tighter. Even the buildings felt tense. Steel doors echoed differently. Footsteps sounded sharper. Something was about to happen. Everyone could feel it. And Hartman, now fully aware she wasn't just dealing with a few coordinated inmates, but with a hidden system that had been alive for more than a decade, felt the silence pushing against her skin. The network was shifting. Reorganizing. Preparing. But what it was preparing for, she still didn't know. She only knew one thing. Someone inside CMC didn't belong in the official records. And that someone wasn't an inmate. The first glitch in the roster. It began when Hartman pulled the personnel log. She did it quietly, off the books, under the excuse of cross-referencing shift details from the night of a prior incident. CMC's roster listed every correctional officer, counselor, nurse, janitorial worker, volunteer, and chaplain. It also listed entry and exit logs for every staff member who passed through the gate. But the moment she printed the log, she saw it. A gap. A literal blank space. Right between two names, a blank spot where a line item should have been. She looked closer. The system assigned numbers to each employee. 221. 222. 223. 224. But the roster jumped like this. 221. 222. 224. 225. There was number 223. Not removed. Not archived. Not redacted. Never listed. But that wasn't the chilling part. The chilling part was that there was a signature on the physical log sheet, a handwritten, signed-in initial, right after 222. Meaning someone signed in as employee 223. Someone came through the gate. Someone entered the facility. Someone existed. But the digital system showed no record of them ever working at CMC. No file. No background check. No assignment. No face. Nothing. An invisible staff member. A ghost. She flipped back to the previous day. Same thing. Then the day before. Same thing. Employee 223 appeared almost every day. But only on paper. Not in the records. Her breath caught. Someone was entering CMC using a staff code that didn't exist. Someone the system wasn't tracking. Someone the network inside the prison could hide. And if the network could hide a staff member, they were deeper than she ever imagined. The gate officer who didn't like questions. She walked to the entrance gate, the giant iron rollers that served as the artery between the outside world and the prison's interior. Gate Officer Renner was on duty, a solid, stoic man with a shaved head and a reputation for never losing his temper. "Renner," she said calmly, "I need to see yesterday's sign-in sheet." He looked up at her with a strange expression. Not annoyance. Not confusion. Worry. "What for?" "I have a discrepancy in the digital roster," she said. "Nothing major. Just need to confirm a line item." Renner hesitated. That alone was unusual. He never hesitated. Finally, he reached under the counter and placed the sheet on the desk. There it was again. Employee 223, signed in at 6:02 a.m. Initials, DH. DH meant nothing to her. No officer. No counselor. No volunteer. No chaplain. Not even an outside contractor. "Who is this?" she asked. Renner's jaw shifted. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I can't tell you that." "Why not?" she asked. He lowered his voice further. "Because I wasn't supposed to check his ID. I was just supposed to let him in." Hartman's blood ran cold. "Who told you that?" Renner shook his head. "Do not ask me that. Do not put me in that position. I just do my job." Renner. He stepped back from the desk. Conversation over. She realized, for the first time, that Renner, a man who followed protocol like it was scripture, was afraid. Not of discipline. Not of her. Of something else. Something inside the prison. Something with enough power to instruct gate officers to allow an unrecorded man through the gate. And now she knew. Employee 223 wasn't missing. He was hidden. Intentionally. By someone with authority. But who? And why? The camera feed trap. Unsatisfied, she headed straight for the control room. CMC's camera feeds covered nearly everything: yards, hallways, dorm units, medical, admin. Not blind spots, those she already knew about, but the high visibility areas. The control officer looked up as she entered. "I need footage from 6 to 6:20 yesterday," she said. "East and west entry corridors." The officer nodded, clicked a few keys, and the footage began. 6:01, hallway empty. 6:02, gate buzz. 6:03, a figure walked through. But the figure was blurred. Not by motion. By programming. A rectangle of pixelated interference moved with the person. As if someone had intentionally scrambled the image. She leaned forward. Why is that camera glitched? The officer frowned. It's not glitched. What do you mean? He pulled up the camera index. What you're seeing is approved scrambling. Approved by who? She asked. He swallowed. Classification Division. Classification was responsible for gang validation and threat analysis. Not for staff-level approval. Not for camera scrambling. This was impossible. Or deliberate. Why would classification scramble a staff member? They said it was for security, the officer said weakly. And I'm not paid enough to question it. The blurred rectangle moved down the hall. Turned left. Turned right. Then disappeared into the west facility. Toward the notebook carrier. The watcher. The blind spot. The new memory. And Reyes. She turned to the officer. Can you track where he went next? He shook his head. No. Only some of the cameras scramble. Only the ones he walks in front of. Someone had programmed a ghost into the surveillance system. Someone the network trusted. Someone who met with them. Someone who moved like a staff member. But acted like an operative. Her chest tightened. CMC wasn't infiltrated. CMC was cooperating. The prison doctor who slipped up. Still trying to identify 223, Hartman pulled medical access logs. Doctors were among the few staff who regularly entered restricted areas. If 223 had gone near medical, she'd see his ID swipe. Except, the ID wasn't there. But something else was. An entry listed at 6:14 a.m. Staff ID, 542. Name, Dr. Halloran. Access, West Medical Wing. Only one problem. Dr. Halloran was on vacation. Out of state. Confirmed by HR. His ID card had been used anyway. Stolen. Loaned. Copied. Or replaced. She checked the hallway footage outside West Medical. Again, the same moving blur appeared. But this time, she slowed the footage down frame by frame. And in one frame, just one, the blur glitched for a millisecond. Just long enough to reveal a silhouette. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Wearing a uniform shirt without a visible name tag. Not a doctor. Not a nurse. Something else. A security contractor. Her throat tightened. CMC had security contractors for only two reasons. Riots. Or classified investigations. But there had been no riot. And if this was an investigation, she would have been notified through IA. Meaning the contractor wasn't official. Meaning he wasn't acting for the state. Meaning he was acting for someone inside the network. The system didn't just have inmates. It had staff-level operatives. And at least one of them was entering the prison under a false employee ID. The case file that revealed the first break. Back in her office, she digitized and enhanced the one unblurred frame from the hallway. The silhouette was clearer now. A dark uniform. No visible CDCR patch. No name badge. No radio. A small object clipped inside his waistband, too small for a weapon, too large for a pen. And a distinct shape under his shirt, a soft armor vest. Then she noticed his posture. He didn't walk like a CO. Didn't move like a nurse. Didn't skin like an officer. He walked like someone who had been in law enforcement. Not prison security. Real law enforcement. Federal. State level. Private. Black site. Then she checked the physical sign-in sheet again. Initials, DH. She ran every staff name, contractor list, volunteer list, and vendor record through the system. Nothing. Then she searched external law enforcement databases. One match. Daniel Hollis, former state investigator, resigned 5 years ago. Unreachable. Rumored to be consulting. Consulting for who? Prisons. Private firms. Or something darker. A rogue network inside a prison. She leaned back in her chair. Hartman realized something devastatingly clear. The network wasn't just inmate-based. It had graduated. It had staff-level assets. It had outside support. It had a ghost consultant. And he had come back. Not to investigate. But to facilitate. The chaplain breaks his silence. The chaplain approached her during evening chow, calm expression, trembling hands. "We need to speak," he whispered. She followed him into the tiny storage room behind the chapel. He closed the door. "I saw something," he said. "What?" He swallowed. "I saw Reyes hand him something." "Him who?" "The ghost." Her pulse spiked. "You saw 223. You saw Hollis." The chaplain nodded slowly. "He was in the chapel yesterday. During non-program hours. No officers. No cameras." "What did Reyes give him?" "A scrap of paper." "What was on it?" "I don't know. But I know what he said." "What?" The chaplain took a long, shaky breath. "He said, he's ready." And Hollis said, "Then we move next week." Her heart jolted. Next week. The handoff. The full transfer. The moment the new memory would replace the old one. The moment the structure would complete its rewrite. And once that happened, no one could undo it. Because the network wouldn't be storing its structure in a notebook anymore. It would be storing it in a living person. The file about to disappear. She sprinted to the SCU file, the old, yellowing, nearly lost folder that started everything. It was gone. Not misplaced. Gone. Her office was empty. Her desk was cleared. Her drawers were open. Whoever took it knew exactly what to grab. No mess. No panic. No trash search. Surgical. She ran to security office C. "Pull camera feed from IA hallway," she demanded. The officer complied. The screen loaded. Blur. 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 Every frame where her office door appeared was scrambled. She went cold. Hollis took the file. Reyes facilitated it. The new memory would inherit it. The Watcher would witness it. And she, Hartman, was running out of time. The message left behind. As she turned to leave her office, she noticed something taped to the wall behind her desk. A single sheet of paper. Blank. Except for 3 words. "You're inside now." Her chest tightened. Her hands went numb. Because she knew exactly what it meant. The network wasn't just watching her. It wasn't just warning her. It had brought her into the structure. Inside the memory chain. Inside the rewrite. Inside the pattern. And once you were inside, you didn't get out. Not unless the system wanted you out. She closed her eyes. The pieces were clear now. Reyes was preparing a handoff. A ghost consultant was facilitating it. The new memory was being groomed. The Watcher was observing. Casares was a placeholder. CMC was the archive. And she was no longer investigating the network. She was now part of its story. Whether she wanted to be or not. The day the network stepped into the light. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. By the time morning count ended, Hartman already knew she was being watched. Not subtly. Not from afar. Directly. A glance here. A pause there. A slow turn of the head whenever she walked past a housing unit. Not aggressive. Not threatening. Worse. Acknowledging. Like everyone, officers and inmates alike, had suddenly been informed that her role had changed. That she was no longer just internal affairs. She was involved. CMC didn't run on spoken tension. It ran on unspoken cues. And the cue whispered across the yard that morning was unmistakable. She knows too much. But Hartman wasn't afraid. Not yet. Fear wasn't the first thing that hits you when you realize you're standing in the center of an invisible structure. The first thing is clarity. Like someone turned the lights on in a dark warehouse. Everything she had missed. Everything she'd brushed off. Everything she thought was coincidence. Suddenly glowed in obvious lines. CMC wasn't a prison. It was a machine. And she had just been pulled into its gears. The file that should have been gone. Hartman entered her office expecting emptiness. The SCU file had been stolen the night before, the message had been taped to her wall, and she anticipated more signs that her space had been compromised. What she didn't expect was what sat neatly centered on her desk. The missing file. Returned. Cleaned. And heavier. She froze. The file wasn't just back, it had new pages. Fresh pages. Inserted without explanation. On top was a yellow sticky note. Keep your place. Not a threat. A command. She opened the file. The first new page was a photograph, slightly grainy, security camera quality, taken in the blind spot corridor behind the chapel. Her breath hitched. The picture captured the exact moment Reyes gestured to the new memory. The courier beside him. The watcher in the background. Someone had taken a photo in a corridor that had no visible cameras. Meaning. The blind spot wasn't a blind spot at all. Someone had a private feed. A hidden camera. A view of the most secret part of CMC. And they were giving it to her. Or mocking her. Or both. Under the photo was a single line typed in small, serif font. Understand before you act. She felt a shiver crawl across her spine. The network wasn't hiding from her anymore. It was teaching her. Showing her things. Inviting her closer. Because she was now part of the story. And the story required a witness. The return of the ghost. At 10:14 a.m., a quiet conversation crackled across staff radios. Attention all units. Be advised, an outside consultant will be entering the West facility for classification review. Consultant. Classification. Review. A perfect cover. Hartman stepped into the hallway just in time to see him. D.H., the ghost. Daniel Hollis. Employee 223. He walked calmly, confidently, uniform shirt tucked neatly, steps unhurried. Eyes forward. As if the entire prison was simply a workplace corridor. 2 officers walked beside him, but not in front. That was unusual. Officers always escorted civilians in front. But Hollis didn't need escorting. He was leading them. Like the prison belonged to him. He passed Hartman without a glance. But as he moved, she caught the slightest twitch of a smirk, so faint it might have been imagined. He knew she had seen the file. Knew she had watched the blind spot meeting. Knew she was piecing together the structure. And he didn't mind. He wanted her to. The chaplain's final confession. The chaplain met her near the chapel steps, his face pale, hands trembling so visibly she wondered if he'd slept at all. We have to talk, he whispered. She followed him inside. The chapel was empty. Chairs stacked. Lighting dim. He shut the door behind them. I can't stay silent anymore, he said. They spoke to me again. Who? She asked. The watcher. Her breath tightened. What did he say? The chaplain swallowed hard. He said, she's next. Her pulse kicked. Next for what? The chaplain looked at her with hollow eyes. Integration. She stared at him. What does that mean? He closed his eyes, voice trembling. It means they don't just want you to back off. They want you involved. She stepped back. This wasn't a threat of harm. It was worse. A threat of absorption. A threat of pulling her into the structure until her investigations were no longer external. The network didn't silence problems. It converted them. The yard freeze, again. Just before noon, she stepped outside into the West facility yard. And immediately, she knew something was wrong. Again, complete silence. A yard freeze. Every inmate stood still. Every officer went stiff. Every instinct in her body screamed danger. Then she saw why. Reyes was walking across the yard. Not rushed. Not secretive. Openly. He had the notebook courier on his right. The watcher on his left. And behind them, the new memory. But this time, the new memory wasn't following them. He was walking beside them. Equal. Recognized. The transfer of knowledge wasn't happening. It had happened. Over. Complete. And then, for the first time, Hartman saw Reyes look directly at her. His eyes were not threatening. Not angry. Not unkind. They were steady. Knowing. Measuring. As if he had been waiting for her to arrive at this moment. He stopped walking. The trio with him stopped too. The entire yard held its breath. Reyes lifted his chin by half an inch, the smallest nod imaginable. A greeting. Acknowledgement. Recognition. She had entered the story. And he was telling her. Welcome. The speech no inmate should make. Reyes turned to the inmates around him. And then he spoke, loudly enough for the yard to hear. You all know why we're here. Officers tensed, no inmate was allowed to address the yard like that. But no one moved. Not even the sergeant. Reyes continued. Memory isn't one man. Memory is the line. And the line is never broken. The courier nodded. The watcher nodded. And the new memory lifted his eyes, calm and unassuming. Reyes continued. We do not lead. We do not rule. We remember. Inmates nodded. Silent. Respectful. This wasn't a riot. Wasn't a gang rally. Wasn't a power display. It was a ceremony. A public recognition of succession. And then, Reyes said the line Hartman would never forget. And today, she remembers too. She went cold. Every head in the yard turned subtly toward her. Not in accusation. In acknowledgement. Acceptance. The network had spoken. She was now part of the story. Not their enemy. Not their ally. Their witness. Their recorder. Their unintended participant in the memory line. The moment the officers did nothing. A lieutenant stepped onto the yard platform and saw Reyes speaking. Normally, protocol required immediate lockdown. Immediate force. Immediate removal. But the lieutenant froze. Why? Because standing beside him was Hollis, the ghost. Hollis put a hand on the lieutenant's shoulder. Said something quietly. The lieutenant nodded. Turned. Walked away. The yard remained open. Reyes remained in place. The network stood unchallenged. And Hollis, the unrecorded staff member, had just overridden every rule of the institution with a single whisper. Hartman felt her breath catch. Authority wasn't the badge. Authority was the influence behind it. Authority wasn't the prison administration. Authority was Hollis and Reyes. She wasn't sure which one was higher. The message in the notebook. As the yard dispersed, calmly, orderly, almost reverently, the notebook courier walked past her. He didn't look at her. Didn't pause. But as he passed, he dropped something at her feet. A small tear-out sheet from the notebook. She waited until the yard emptied before picking it up. One sentence was written on it. You can't stop a memory. You can only decide which side of it you stand on. Her throat tightened. This was no longer an investigation. It was an initiation. The file that explained the unexplainable. Back in her office, she opened the returned SCU file again. Several new pages had been added. But the one that struck her was labeled. Structural Overview, Revised. She read it slowly. And her stomach dropped. It explained everything. The older LO wasn't a leader, he was a memory archive. Ortega wasn't a fluke, he was tested for potential. Reyes wasn't a shot caller, he was the keeper of continuity. The courier wasn't a messenger, he was a binder of information. The watcher wasn't a spy, he was a historical backup. The ghost wasn't a contractor, he was oversight. The system wasn't a gang, it was a repository of memory, built to survive transfers, crackdowns, and time. It wasn't about violence. It wasn't about hierarchy. It was about preservation. A living library. A generational ledger. Built inside a prison because a prison was the only place stable enough to hold it. Hartman leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed. This wasn't criminal structure. This was institutional history. Hidden. Passed on. Curated. Protected. And now she knew. The next chapter wasn't about stopping the network. It was about understanding why it existed. And why it had chosen her as its accidental custodian. Because if she didn't understand, she wouldn't survive what was coming next. The archive underneath the prison. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. The sun went down over CMC like it always did, slow, amber, smoothing the sharp edges of the razor wire until it looked almost peaceful. But inside the prison, nothing felt peaceful. Hartman felt it before she saw it. A tightening. A closing in. Like the walls themselves had lungs and were holding a breath too long. The network was no longer whispering. No longer hiding. No longer hinting. It was moving. And tonight, it wanted her to witness something. Because tonight was the night the memory would be finalized. Tonight was the night the archive would reveal itself. Tonight was the night the system would step out of shadow and into full view. Not for everyone. Just for her. The summons. It wasn't a written note. It wasn't a message slid under her door. It came as a conversation, the simplest kind, from the most unexpected messenger. A rookie officer knocked on her office door. He couldn't have been older than 24. Still learning the rhythm of the yard. Still wide-eyed enough to believe what the academy taught him. He didn't walk in. He hovered uncertainly, shifting his weight between his boots. "Ma'am. I was told to bring you to the chapel." "Told by whom?" she asked. He shook his head, confused. I don't know. A lieutenant gave me the order." "Never seen him before." "Name?" she asked sharply. The rookie swallowed. "He didn't give one. Just said you'd know." A cold ripple slid down her spine. Because she did know. This wasn't a lieutenant. This was Hollis. The ghost. Employee 223. The man who wasn't in the system but walked through the prison like he wrote the rules. She stood slowly. "Is the chapel secured?" she asked. The officer nodded. "Yes, ma'am. It's been cleared for the evening. Doors locked from the inside. Just waiting on you." Waiting. Her stomach coiled. The network wasn't covering its tracks anymore. It wanted her in the center of something. She walked past the rookie and headed down the corridor. Her footsteps echoed off the walls in a rhythm that felt too steady, too intentional, like the building itself was marking time. When she reached the chapel doors, the rookie stepped back. "You're not coming inside?" she asked. He shook his head quickly. "Ma'am. I'm not allowed." Allowed. The word hit her like a warning bell. Not assigned. Not ordered. Allowed. Meaning someone else decided who could enter the chapel tonight. And that someone wasn't part of the official chain of command. She took a breath. Then she pushed open the chapel doors. The chapel prepared for her. The lights were low, soft enough to hide shadows, bright enough to see. Every chair had been removed except one. Placed dead center. Facing the altar. Facing them. Reyes sat in the first row. The courier stood beside him. The watcher leaned casually against a pillar. The new memory stood near the front, hands folded, eyes calm. And at the back of the chapel, leaning against the wall like he owned the place, stood Hollis. D.H. Employee 223. The Phantom. Every figure in the room turned their head toward her in perfect unison. Not choreographed. Practiced. "This is a setup," she almost whispered to herself. But when she stepped inside, no one moved. They were waiting. Expecting. Inviting. She walked toward the single chair. The watcher pulled it back slightly as if welcoming her to sit. Reyes nodded in gratitude for her arrival, as if she had done something meaningful by simply showing up. Hollis spoke first. His voice was calm. Measured. Not hostile. "We're glad you came, Investigator Hartman." She didn't sit. "What is this?" she demanded. Reyes stood. "This," he said calmly, "is the part you were always going to reach. Whether you wanted to or not." Hollis stepped closer. "You've been tracing a structure without understanding its purpose." The watcher smirked faintly. The courier held a notebook, the notebook, not the blue one anymore, but a fresh one. The same kind she saw the new memory writing in. Hartman scanned their faces. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Reyes gestured gently at the chair. "To witness," he said. "Witness what?" "The truth," Hollis said. "The part no file ever recorded. The secret history of the network." Reyes stepped toward her, not threatening, but deliberate. "Do you know why the original memory was created?" he asked. She shook her head. "No. All I saw were fragments." Reyes nodded slowly. "Then you need the beginning." He motioned toward the courier, who opened the new notebook and read aloud. It wasn't coded text. Not gang directives. Not criminal messages. It was history. Clean, structured, chronological entries. 20 years worth. 20 years ago, Reyes said, a faction inside the prison system realized something. Violence can be cracked down on. Leadership can be transferred. Orders can be intercepted. But the one thing no one can stop. He met her eyes. Is memory. The courier turned the page. Prison gangs shattered. Alliances broke. Officials were rotated. Yards separated. But the knowledge, the deeper structure, risked being lost. Hartman felt her heart pounding. Reyes continued. So we built an archive. Not in files. Not on paper. In people. The watcher nodded. Each generation has a memory. A keeper. A witness. A historian. Hollis spoke. And each generation has oversight. Someone to ensure the chain remains functional. Not to direct it. But to protect it. Hartman's eyes widened. You, she said quietly. You're the oversight. Hollis nodded once. I ensure continuity. Information integrity. No corruption. No distortion. No decay. Hartman stared. You're not a criminal. Correct, Hollis said plainly. But I'm also not here for the state's benefit. Reyes added. He's here for ours. The air in her lungs felt heavy. This wasn't a gang. This was a living archive designed to preserve a collective memory that survived transfer, loss, violence, and time. But for what purpose? What are you preserving? She asked. Reyes inhaled deeply. The stories, he said. The truths that would be buried. The patterns that officials ignore. The movements that shape everything but never get documented. The new memory spoke for the first time, quiet, steady. We preserve what the system refuses to see. Hartman's skin prickled. But why bring me here? She asked. Reyes stepped closer. Because you opened the file, he said simply. And once you open the file, you join the story. Hollis added. You became a witness. And every witness must choose their position. What position? She whispered. Inside, Reyes said softly, or outside. The offer. Hartman felt her pulse hammer. They weren't threatening her. Not directly. They weren't manipulating her. They were offering her something. A role. A place. Hollis stepped in front of her. You can continue fighting us. Trying to shut us down. Trying to expose something that cannot be exposed. He tilted his head. The state would not believe you. The administration would not understand. The structure is older than all of them. Reyes added. Or you can be part of the preservation. She stiffened. You want me to join you? Not join, Reyes corrected. Balance. The new memory stepped forward. You understand corruption. You understand systems. You understand patterns. You are the first outsider in 20 years to decode us without being told. Reyes nodded. And we need balance. Oversight from someone who sees the cracks in the official system. Hollis added, someone who isn't blind. She looked at each of them. Reyes, the historian. Hollis, the overseer. The courier, the binder. The watcher, the recorder. The new memory, the successor. They waited. Not forcing. Not pressuring. Waiting for a choice. She swallowed. And if I say no? Reyes spread his hands. Then you walk away. Unaffected. Unharmed. Unfollowed. Hollis added. But forgetfulness is dangerous. Not to us. To you. The watcher nodded calmly. Because once you've seen a structure, you can't unsee it. And the state will never understand what you know. Silence filled the chapel like a living thing. Hartman finally asked. Why me? Reyes smiled sadly. Because you looked deeper. Because you didn't run. Because you connected dots even we didn't know were connected. Hollis finished the thought. And because every archive needs a new page. The revelation under the chapel floor. Reyes walked toward the altar and slid aside a wooden panel hidden in the floor. Under it was a staircase. Dimly lit. Old. Dusty. Not part of any official blueprint. Come, he said. Hartman hesitated. Hollis nodded. It's time you see the archive. She followed them down the stairs. What she found beneath the chapel was not a bunker. Not a vault. Not a hideout. It was a room. Simple. Concrete walls. Dim lighting. A long table. 4 chairs. A single cabinet. Reyes opened the cabinet. Inside were notebooks. Dozens. Not gang logs. Not contraband lists. History. Recorded by memory keepers over 2 decades. Names. Dates. Patterns. Events. Threat assessments. Insights into prison politics no official ever documented. A collective memory of a world the state refused to acknowledge. Reyes placed a notebook in her hands. Read. She opened it. The first page wasn't about violence. It wasn't about orders. It wasn't about gangs. It was a list of conflicts that had been prevented, quietly, by the network's understanding of social dynamics inside the prison. She flipped the page. More prevented conflicts. More early warnings. More interventions. This is, you help avoid violence, she whispered in disbelief. Not help, Reyes corrected. Balance. Hollis spoke from behind her. The system reacts. We anticipate. The watcher added. The system punishes. We understand. The new memory said softly. The system forgets. We remember. Hartman's throat tightened. This was not what she expected. This was not a criminal enterprise. This was parallel governance. An invisible structure maintaining equilibrium the official system could never recognize. She asked the final question. Why did you choose him? She asked, nodding toward the new memory. Reyes smiled faintly. Because he listens. Hollis added. And because he doesn't seek power. The courier. And because he doesn't speak more than necessary. The watcher. And because he watches the right way. Reyes looked at her. Just like you. The decision. Back in the chapel, the tension returned. Everyone watched her. Everyone waited. She closed the notebook gently. Her voice came out steady. I won't be part of your network. A flicker of disappointment crossed Reyes' eyes, but only faintly. She continued. But I won't expose you either. Hollis raised an eyebrow. Explain. You're not the threat, she said quietly. You're the stabilizer. The last thing holding this place together. Reyes nodded slowly. Then what will you do? I'll do my job, she said. But I'll look at things the way you do. Patterns. Structures. Balance. Hollis smiled. A third path, he said. The new memory stepped forward. Then you are the outside witness. The one who sees both sides. Reyes bowed his head slightly. And that, he said softly, is enough. They dispersed. One by one. Until only Hollis remained. You made the right choice, he said. She looked at him. I didn't choose a side. He nodded. Exactly. Then he stepped into the shadow of the doorway. And vanished. The final note. When Hartman returned to her office, she found one last sheet of paper on her desk. Not blank. Written. Simple. Clear. The archive remembers you. She sat down slowly. For the first time in weeks. She wasn't afraid. Not of them. Not of the system. Not of the truth. Because she understood the role she had walked into. A witness position between worlds. A guardian of balance. A keeper of unseen connections. And perhaps, the only person capable of documenting the structure without destroying it. California Men's Colony had given her a new purpose. Not to expose the archive. Not to join it. But to see it. To understand it. And to ensure the system didn't collapse on itself. Because some stories aren't meant to be buried. Some truths survive only in the spaces between silence and memory. And inside the walls of CMC. Memory was the only power that mattered.